Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan were presidential opponents, but they both chose Simon & Schuster to publish their books, and we've got stories to tell, including the unforgettable tale of Ronald Reagan and the chocolate chip cookie. We know who won the 1980 presidential election between Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, but who was the more successful author? Those of us at Simon & Schuster are in a unique position to cast the deciding vote, having published both of them, along with many books about them. One of those books is Author-in-Chief, The Untold Story of the Presidents and the Books They Wrote by Craig Furman, who describes the scene when Ronald Reagan traveled to Simon & Schuster's New York headquarters to promote his autobiography. According to Furman, Reagan played the part of the author, posing with his editor, Michael Korda, as they pretended to work over a blank piece of paper. After the photo op was over, Reagan joked, "I hear it's a terrific book. One of these days I'm going to read it myself." Jimmy Carter, by contrast, actually wrote his autobiography. Simon & Schuster published 3 books by Reagan, a collection of his speeches, his autobiography, An American Life, and a final work that many regarded as his most illuminating, Reagan in His Own Hand, which showed how hard Reagan worked at communicating his ideas. Jimmy Carter has written more books than any president in American history, 42. In a biography of Carter called His Very Best, author Jonathan Alter calls Carter the most misunderstood president in American history, adding that he was the first American president since Thomas Jefferson who could fairly claim to be a Renaissance man, or at least a world-class autodidact. Simon & Schuster has published 30 of Carter's books on everything from fly fishing to historical fiction. His editor was Alice Mayhew, who was also the editor of All the President's Men by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. In Carter's memoir, A Full Life, he recalled watching the movie of All the President's Men as one of his first screenings in the White House Family Theater. He said he chose that movie because it had contributed to his election. Of all the books by Carter that Alice Mayhew edited, she had a favorite, An Hour Before Daylight, Memories of a Rural Childhood, which the New Yorker called an American classic. Craig Furman agreed, noting, his memoir does not strain for lyricism. In simple sentences, he recalls his rural childhood, ordering essentials from the Sears Roebuck catalog, splurging to see Al Jolson at the movies, going outside to catch and kill a chicken for dinner after his mother says, "Jimmy, go get me a big broiler." Interestingly, Carter and Reagan have very little to say about each other in their books, and not surprisingly, what they do say isn't favorable. Here's Reagan. Carter took a low road of personal attacks on my character because I said I believed states should be allowed to regain the rights and powers granted to them in the Constitution. He implied I was a racist pandering to Southern voters. Carter's view? I was somewhat disconcerted when Reagan made his introductory speech in Philadelphia, Mississippi, which was well known as the place where 3 civil rights workers were murdered by Ku Klux Klan members and buried in a dam. They maintained a respectful relationship after the election. In 1986, President Reagan spoke at the dedication of the Carter Presidential Library. Jonathan Alter describes the scene in His Very Best. Reagan gave a gracious speech, praising Carter's passionate intellect and commitment. Carter responded, "As I listened to you talk, I understood more clearly than I ever did in my life why you won in 1980 and I lost." Alter singles out one of Carter's later books for praise, A Call to Action, Women, Religion, Violence, and Power. He describes it as a searing depiction of what Carter called the worst human rights abuse on earth, the mistreatment of women. I had the privilege of meeting President Carter when we published A Call to Action in 2014. We had lunch in the Midtown Hotel. Normally in restaurants, I have trouble hearing the conversation, but at the age of 90, President Carter heard every word, and he had a lot to say about events in the Middle East, where he still knew many of the leaders and their families. Ronald Reagan wasn't nearly as engaged in writing his book, according to his editor Michael Korda, who described their working relationship in one of the best memoirs about the publishing world ever written, Another Life. Korda describes Reagan as charm personified, but discovered that the president tended to confuse fiction and reality. According to Korda, he had the ability, rare among actors, to convince a listener that something had happened the way he told it when it hadn't, and he believed it with complete sincerity himself. Reagan's memory was sharp, but only when he was interested in what he was remembering, and Korda began to think that Reagan was more interested in his golf game than his book, which did not sell nearly as well as expected. Which brings us to the chocolate chip cookie. Reagan was meeting with Korda and a small group of staffers, including his collaborator, Robert Lindsay. An assistant brought in a plate of chocolate chip cookies that had been baked personally by the Reagan's maid early that morning. Reagan was beaming at them as if they were culinary works of art, Korda writes. He took one off the plate, then passed it to the person to his right, and so on around the table. When they returned to work on the manuscript, Korda noticed that Reagan's attention was elsewhere. At first, Korda thought the president was thinking about golf, but he saw Reagan looking longingly at the plate with only one chocolate chip cookie left. The truth struck me like a thunderbolt, Korda writes. What he wanted was the remaining cookie, but of course he couldn't take it. You do not take the last cookie on the plate, you offer it around. So Korda coughed and said how much he had enjoyed his cookie. Now that I had given Reagan a cue, he picked up on it instantly. Lifting the plate, he pointed to the remaining cookie. Would anyone like the last cookie, he asked. His aides passed the plate around without anyone taking the cookie. Reagan looked hopeful and was moments from reaching for the cookie when his collaborator suddenly grabbed it. Korda writes, Reagan's face crumpled, his expression that of a man who had just staked the farm on one card and lost. His eyes turned humid, almost welling up with tears. I have seldom felt so bad for anyone. So, in the literary contest between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, here's what we know. Jimmy Carter wrote many more books to more acclaim, with greater range, and with more profitability to the publisher. The winner seems clear to me, but we can let the historians decide. And that is the word according to Karp.